if you want to talk about the ship switching theory, that one is really it's the first time I heard it, I was like, no, no, no. And then I looked and I counted the
Right.
portholes and I was like, well, damn.
Welcome to my channel. I'm Trixie Lane, and today we're going to talk about the Titanic and the conspiracy theories behind the Titanic. But before we get started, let's start with a brief introduction of images of my experience at a Titanic museum in Branson, Missouri. And then we'll get into the discussion. Thank you for watching, and please remember to comment, like, and subscribe.
Seated one day at the Oregon, I was weary and ill at ease, and my fingers wandered idly over the noisy keys. I know not what I was playing, or what I was dreaming then, but I struck one chord of music like the sound of a great amen, like the sound of a great amen. It flooded the crimson twilight like the close of an angel's fan, and it lay on my fevered spirit with a touch of infinite calm. It quieted pain and sorrow like love overcoming strife. It seems the harmonious echo from our discordant life. It links all perplexed meanings into one perfect peace, and trembled away in the silence as if it were lost to cease. I've thought that I think it belly, that wall of door divine, which sprang from the soul of the organ, and entered into mine. It may be that death's bright angel will speak in the court again. It may be that only in heaven I shall hear that grand amen. It may be that death's bright angel will speak in that court again. It may be that only in heaven.
So, for the viewers, I just want to make something clear. I don't have a whole lot of knowledge in a lot of this area. I'm curious about the conspiracies behind it because I have a fascination with the Titanic. Although I don't know a whole lot about it, I don't entertain my fascination too much.
Mhm.
So, to have this discussion, and Stone, you have such a calming voice and you have a lot of knowledge. You love to read and research. And, I thought having you have this conversation and answer my questions, maybe any of the viewer questions that's going to be coming along, would actually help me gain that extra knowledge. But I just want to be very transparent. I'm an idiot when it comes to this.
Oh,
And
no,
I'm
you're not.
learning.
Uh,
I'm learning.
I really appreciate you having me because this is something that I have hyperfixated on since I was a child.
We are talking about the Titanic and the Olympic today, like what the conspiracies around the Titanic are. There are many going around, especially involving the elites, and how many of them were invited to sail the Titanic during its launch, and some didn't go on the Titanic, and some did and ended up passing away. Pieces of the Titanic narrative: not all elites died. Several wealthy and socially powerful passengers survived.
There were a few that made it out. Bruce Ismay was in the, well, he was up high in the White Star Line, and he was one of the
Yeah,
one of
he
the
was the
ones who.
chairman.
Right, right. So there were rumors that he dressed up as a woman, but that it's to get onto a lifeboat, but it's not. That's never been confirmed.
Yeah, I'm
It
not
was
even seeing
implied in
that
one
on
of the
here.
movies, but I don't think I tend to think that was just slander because people were angry that he made it.
Right, yeah, it's showing that he suffered from public backlash because he was labeled as a coward for
Mm-hmm.
getting on a lifeboat while many
Certainly.
others had passed
Right?
away. And
Yeah.
then there is Cosmo Duff Gordon and his wife Lucy Duff Gordon. They were fashion elites, and they escaped in Lifeboat 1, and they were accused of bribing the crew to
Mm-hmm.
not go back for survivors, which was not officially proven but widely discussed.
Right. I have heard that.
And then there was Miss Margaret Brown, the unsinkable Margaret or Molly
Mhm.
Brown.
Yeah.
I don't know what she was wealthy for. It's not listed on what I
Her
have.
husband was struck it rich in the gold. She was nouveau riche at the time, so she was new
That's
money.
right.
Yeah, her
That's
husband
right.
struck it rich out west in the gold. He got very lucky with a gold mine, and she
That's
was
right.
quite the character.
Famously portrayed by Kathy Bates in the iconic film Titanic, the real Molly Brown was even more incredible than her fictional counterpart. Not only did Brown survive the disaster, but she also put her life on the line to save others on that fateful night. As the ship started to go down on April 14, 1912, Brown helped others make it safely onto lifeboats before eventually boarding one herself. She then helped row her fellow passengers to safety, before stopping to insist that they go back so that they could save more people in the water.
There's plenty of room for more.
When a crewman warned Brown that they might get sucked into the ocean, she refused to back down and even threatened to throw him overboard if he didn't listen to her. And when that same crewman objected to Brown's insistence that the women should be allowed to row, she went ahead and handed out oars anyway.
Fight down, I'm telling you.
Knock it off. You're scaring me. Come on, girls. Grab an oar. Let's go.
Leaving him to mutter to himself about how they were unlikely to survive.
Yeah, she was a fire pistol, wasn't she?
Mhm.
They definitely picked the right person to play Molly
To
Brown
play her.
in Cameron
Yeah.
James's version of Titanic.
Hmm.
What a fire pistol she was.
She started moving people from, to make room on the lifeboat. She was one of the ones, it wasn't really as much the crew as it was Molly Brown. Started moving the
Right.
lifeboats together and shifting them around so they could pick up survivors.
Absolutely. Then there's Archibald Gracie the Fourth. I've never heard that name before. I don't know who this person is.
I don't know much about them either, to be honest with you. They were just listed as money, but they're not well known.
So this is off the record from the conversation that I had with Stone. I went to edit to add this in because I did look up Archibald Gracie the Fourth, and it did say that he wrote a book called The Truth About the Titanic in 1912 before he passed away after the whole tragedy of the Titanic, right? So the question I asked, since it's called The Truth About the Titanic, did he write about the conspiracies of trying to target the elites? And the response was no. Archibald Gracie's book, The Truth About the Titanic, does not claim the disaster was a conspiracy or that elites were a target. Gracie's account is very methodical and reads more like a witness log and reconstruction, not a theory piece. He focuses on the timeline of the collision and sinking, behavior of the passengers and crew, lifeboat loading issues, heroism and chaos on deck, and his own survival on collapsible B. He spent a lot of time interviewing other survivors to verify the details. It concludes that the Titanic disaster was just tragic and a failure, not an orchestrated elimination of elites, although I think we all call bull. Basically all it lists for this person was they survived by clinging to an overturned lifeboat and later died from health complications related to the disaster.
Okay, I can see that.
But let's talk about where the conspiracy comes from. We have powerful bankers and, those that are heavily involved in the financial world of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, are opponents of the central banking.
Mm-hmm.
They were targeted. And then there's, of course, the Titanic was actually the Olympic ship swap theory, which we're going to get to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the core allegation of this was they opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve and were eliminated. That was the whole point of this target, this potential target, the conspiracy of it all.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is after, one of the questions I'm going to be asking is the elites that were invited to sail the Titanic, was what they were wanting a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I don't think many people would say it was.
So with that allegation of the opposed of the creation of the Federal Reserve, that means they didn't want the Federal Reserve, so that was a bad thing, right?
Though they didn't want it to be the people that went down with the ship in almost every case did not want the Federal Reserve to be enacted. Well, it ends up being a bad thing. Their influence may have changed the course of history.
But let's say that the Federal Reserve was never created. Would that have been a better thing? My thought process is, was the Federal Reserve created to protect the owners of the money or to rob them in the long haul and control them?
Yeah, that is the big question. I don't know how to word it. I think that them going down with the ship ended up being, a bad thing because they would have opposed the creation of the Fed.
So, okay, we can start here. What is the Federal Reserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Created in 1913, 1 year after the Titanic sank. It controls interest rates, money supply, and banking stability. It's the central banking system of the United States. That's the simple term of it, right?
Mm-hmm. It's basically we're living off of interest, debt, the fractional reserve banking system, because that's what we ended up with the creation of the Fed.
It's neither purely good nor purely bad. It's a tool. Why people say it's good, it stabilizes the economy during crisis, controls inflation and interest rates, acts as a backstop for banks, which prevents collapses. Why people say it's bad, a lot of power concentrated in one system, decisions can benefit some groups more than others, and can contribute to inflation if mismanaged. The Federal Reserve is useful when managed well, harmful when managed poorly. Its impact depends on policy decisions, not its existence alone. So, in reality, as my parents would say, you can't own a new truck these days without getting a loan and being in debt for it. And now you're in even more debt because you're paying all these interest back.
Right.
And it's doing is aligning their pockets. So in short, it is technically bad. It's a safety net, but in the long haul, it screws people too.
Mm-hmm. Well, if they set the interest rates, then they're the reason that credit cards are no longer, 8% interest like they were in the 90s. Now you get a credit card, it's 31% interest unless you held the card for a long, long time. And if they're able to set that, it's controlling the market for sure.
So because of that, my next question I'm going to be asking, what world would we be in if the Federal Reserve was never created and the elites had survived?
Mm-hmm.
If we throw out conspiracy and make it fact. So
that's a very good one.
So its short answer is we wouldn't be in a completely different elite controlled versus free world, just a more unstable financial system. What likely changes is number one, more bank crashes and financial chaos. Before the Federal Reserve pre-1913, banks failed often. Did they though? I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Out west, they were known to, but the bigger, more established they were always on the East Coast, and people. But in the West, it was the Wild West.
I mean, and I don't have any knowledge in how that even works. The best I can give, and this is going to even sound ridiculous, is all I can sit here and picture in my mind right now is Little House on the Prairie days. They did have a bank in Walnut Grove, a little itty
Mm-hmm.
bitty bank, and it did just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you can have an itty bitty town of population of like maybe 20 is my guess. I don't know. It was so
Every
tiny
town
that
had a bank. Oh, they
they
did.
did. They
Yeah,
did. And they had one rich person, which, back then was, the mercantile owners
mm-hmm.
and them, you have that one rich person that can keep the town floating and that
Mm-hmm.
bank going, but so it says banks would fail often, no central system to stabilize things, panic spreads quickly, like the 1907 financial panic. I don't know what happened there. Without it, you'd likely see more frequent economic crashes.
I
So
don't
with
know whether that's true or not either, but it
I
does
don't
make a
know, and that
rational argument. It does,
it
but
does.
we really can't say because
Exactly.
we don't have the example to look at.
Exactly. And it's not providing me those examples. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got a couple more points. So, number 2, no central control of interest rates, which, okay, but are we aligning I get it. They're in the business to make money, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But when you got APRs so high, who's just being greedy?
That's exactly it. And also the way the banking system works is like you put your money in the bank. The bank takes your money and loans it out to other people, and then they make money on
Exactly.
the interest that they, so they're keeping the interest that they used your money to make,
And did anybody think that this is like a legalized Ponzi scheme?
It does seem like a great big Ponzi scheme. It
Because
basically,
they're
yeah,
they're even they're loaning borrowed money
uh
too.
huh. And
You
that's
know,
how it's what we're working on in this country. That's what the
yeah.
fractional reserve system is. It's crazy when you sit
So
down and think about it.
it's like a legalized Ponzi scheme. It's
Mhm.
ridiculous and so hypocritical in every way.
Yeah.
So no central control of interest rates, so no coordinated response to inflation or recessions. Lending rates would swing wildly, and the result of that would be less predictability in the economy. Number 3, government would still create something even if the Fed didn't exist. The US would most certainly build another central banking system later because
Yeah.
modern economies require coordination.
Well, that makes sense, but that doesn't mean the system that they have in place is a good one or was a good
Right.
one from the beginning.
Right.
Which brings
So
us back to J.J. Astor.
exactly. And people are going to say, why is this even important about the Titanic and the Olympic? Because isn't the conspiracy that the Olympic was sailing and not the Titanic? And we're going to get to that. But I just wanted to make it clear that this is why these elites, these specific elites, and we're not even done talking about them, were invited to sail during this launch. And that's why we keep bringing this up. It is a hot topic, and we can even discuss the others because they play a huge role. We've got JP Morgan, who's the owner of a wide range financial service companies like Chase Bank, JP
Mm-hmm.
Morgan Asset Management, Highbridge, Capital Management, WePay, Instamed, and so many others. JP Morgan was probably one of the most important elites
He
that was
was.
invited onto
He
this
was.
ship
And then
because
he said he was sick, but then he was seen in Paris, like during the sailing, and he seemed fine. So,
yeah, he just, the claim was he supposedly canceled last minute, which we knew, and the
mm-hmm.
conspiracy says he knew something would happen, which he could have. He very
Could
well
have.
could have. I mean, when you look at the guest list for this launch, it probably wasn't hard to put 2 and 2 together. You
Mm-hmm.
got to think these men didn't just come from money out of thin air back in those days.
No, it was a
They
little
were
club.
smart. They were
Mm-hmm.
smart. You had to have brains to know what was going on to be that successful.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the reality, he owned the White Star Line's parent company, which means there's a very good chance he was tipped off. And there's a chance he tipped off a few of the others that canceled too. He did have a private suite booked for the Titanic, and he canceled days before the launch. The documented reasons: he stayed in France for health and business, is what it's saying. And there are verified letters and hotel tell records. He did cancel, but not last minute panic, more like change of plans. Milton Hershey, which you said Hershey isn't talked about enough.
I don't think he's even mentioned in any of the movies about it, and very little of the information about it because he canceled. And I don't think he stated a reason. He just did.
The claim was he avoided the Titanic intentionally, and he had a reservation, but he left on an earlier ship. So he claims he needed to return to the United States for business commitments, and that
That's
there is
interesting.
actual documentation of his booking, but nothing suspicious about the change. Marconi,
But yeah, he definitely should have been on that boat because it was one of the first ships that employed the Marconi radio technology.
He actually gives a pretty good reason as to why he didn't board. The claim is he avoided Titanic because he knew, which he probably did. If he really was the tech for the wireless systems that he had created, then there's a good chance somebody tipped him off. His work was very important.
The earliest reports of the Titanic sinking come from a kid in New York who was listening to his Marconi radio and picked up the transmissions of the distress calls and then the calls from the Californian on the way back. And a lot of things were unconfirmed, until they landed in New York. But it was his tech that got the word out, the way where they were rescued at all.
It claims that he chose to sail on a different ship and preferred to travel earlier for work related to wireless systems. He needed to manage those tickets or whatever he had. But his, ironically, his wireless tech saved lives during the disaster too, not just his. Henry Frick.
No, I don't know this one.
It states this is another elite who backed out, planned to travel, but his wife was injured. He stayed back due to her health condition. He was a powerful American industrialist and one of the key figures behind the U.S. steel industry in the late 1800s. He was right-hand man to Andrew Carnegie, who helped build Carnegie Steel, which later became part of the U.S. Steel, and made massive fortune in steel and coke production, fuel for steelmaking. He's controversial because he's a central figure in the Homestead Strike. He's seen as ruthless by critics and strategic businessman by supporters. His connection to the Titanic is he planned to travel on it and did not board. His legacy today is his mansion is now the Frick Collection, known for massive art collection and influence on American industry.
I've heard of the art collection. I always remember that. What a great name.
So now we get on to the elites who did board but died. The richest one being John Jacob Astor.
He was one of the
richest. Yes. Now, if I recall, you got the higher, like the Rothschild, whoever. I think Astor's was on that list too, wasn't it?
He was. He was one of the richest men in the world when he was alive. And the family, his wife was pregnant, I'm not sure if they were even married at the time. There was a little bit of a scandal around it. It's briefly mentioned in the 1997 movie. She got on a boat, but his family, was like with his death, the family fortune pretty much dissipated. The Astors are not a huge family anymore. It's not like the Rothschilds are still around. You still hear the Carnegies, but you don't hear about Astors anymore.
So we got major old money, Rothschilds, Rockefeller, Morgan, which is also J.P. Morgan, by the way, Astor, Vanderbilt, and Carnegie, and then there's Warburg.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's like who's the highest top tier and where does it end? Benjamin Guggenheim.
Yeah.
I could have said that wrong. Isidore Strauss and Ida Strauss. They're co-owner of Macy's. But now we kind of want to get into theory behind why we believe it's the Olympic sailing and not the Titanic. Somebody explained it really well.
Okay.
Royal Navy cruiser HMS Hawke is steaming in the Solent, the narrow channel between the Isle of Wight and the English coast. It's a fine, clear day, and Hawke finds herself steaming alongside a much larger ship. HMS Olympic, the monstrous new luxury liner of the White Star Line, has just executed a turn to the east, and now the two ships are on a parallel course as Olympic heads outbound. What happens next shocks everybody. With the two ships alongside, Hawke's bow turns in towards Olympic's stern. It slams home, cutting through Olympic's hull as if it was made of paper. For the White Star Line, the incident is beyond frustrating. The battle for dominance in the North Atlantic passenger trade was tightly contested. Olympic and her forthcoming sister ships, with Titanic already nearing completion, were to be the next chapter in the company's decades-long success story. But now, Olympic had to be patched and limp her way back to Belfast, where her builders, the Harland and Wolff shipyard, would need to fix her up. The ship arrived back where she had only just recently left, and there, for one of the few times in their careers, Olympic and Titanic were alongside one another as repairs got underway. But this is the point where theory and conjecture have become intertwined with real history, because recently claims have been made of a nefarious plot. The story goes like this. Olympic is badly damaged in the collision with Hawke, too badly damaged. She is no longer of any use to the White Star Line, and her seaworthiness is ruined. But there, sitting unfinished, is the near-identical sister ship, Titanic. Building these things was an enormous financial burden, and now, with Olympic out of action permanently, the company could never hope to collect on their investment. What if White Star Line and Harland and Wolff colluded to stage one of the most audacious insurance frauds in history? What if Olympic and Titanic switched places, the permanently damaged Olympic setting to sea on a second maiden voyage under a new name, but tragically sinking at a predetermined point along the way? The insurance payday would come, and the White Star Line would survive. All that needed to happen was to switch the two ships around and pull off the sinking.
The Olympic was badly damaged and out of commission. When it was hobbled back to get fixed up, it was the first time and only time it was side by side the Titanic. Because of the decommission, they were going to be out the money. So they probably committed insurance fraud. So they decided to cut their losses and use the already damaged Olympic, which would explain why it was so easily damaged by an iceberg when it hit. And they swapped out the nameplates, and potentially changed the logs of the propellers so that they matched.
But they couldn't change the portholes. They couldn't change the porthole count. Yeah, that's a really, really profound thought that they may have done that. And there is a lot of evidence to support it.
It is the Olympic that was set sailed.
It certainly looks that way. When you count the portholes, and even on the wreck on the ship on the bottom of the ocean, you can go and look at them now. To put the images of them. It matches what the Olympic had, not the Titanic. Now, there's like a really strange cover story that said they decided at the last minute there wasn't enough room, natural light in the crew's quarters. But one, I don't think they cared about the crew that much. And two, especially to cut round holes in a ship, and alter the structure. Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't.
I believe you said to me earlier that it was kind of like an insult to the structure.
It would have.
You can't fit a round peg in a square hole, or vice versa, whatever it was, whatever the saying goes.
I mean, it's not like this is a load bearing. The hull is a load bearing wall, so it's holding things up. You can't just willy nilly cut holes in it.
You've got Captain Smith, who supposedly knew that this was going to be the fate.
It was known that it was his last voyage, and they always said that, like he was retiring after, but could be taken another way.
Is it possible that he knew that this was a setup?
And the captain goes down with the ship.
And then the binoculars. What's ironic, though? The people today, and even in the last 30, 40 years, since James Cameron came out with his version of Titanic, which he did a spectacular job. The problem with that is it wasn't realistic. It just focused on a narrative of non-fictional characters like Jack and Rose, heavily focused on a romance story.
It was more of a love story than a story about the Titanic, which made it work. Everybody knew the story.
And it was good for, entertainment, but it's also an issue because we've already been asleep from a lot of the things that our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents have tried to carry over generation to generation to warn us about of the future, because they knew. But now this is just part of another influence of, keeping the truth buried.
Yeah.
And knowledge is key. How many people have died because of these things? Because they knew something or they said something.
Yeah, you could be taken out just for knowing the wrong thing, and that's terrifying.
It is. And that's what I see with James Cameron's version. And like I
Mhm.
said, he did an amazing job recreating a lot of the drama of it. But the trauma
Mhm.
itself and the tragedy of that situation was still covered up. Did you notice how minimal the tragedy was not shown? They were still heavily focused on Rose saving Jack from down below the ship in the
Yeah.
quarters where he was handcuffed. And it's like,
Yeah.
and them trying to escape it
Mhm.
versus, what was going on up
Mhm.
top, what stemmed from this, what's the history behind
And where was
and
the captain
that's
at this time? Where was Thomas Andrews? This, that, and the other. Yeah, it was a fictionalized version of events. The one thing he was the first to get right was that the ship broke apart.
right.
It looks like almost they're a good ways apart, but it looks like they were together, like separated, but held together by like the wiring and such, at least part way down into the ocean. But there was one kid during the sinking that swore that the ship had broken apart, and they basically made fun of him. They dismissed his testimony. It was like he drew pictures, and they were included in a couple of books, but everybody was like, the experts say no.
Kids tell the truth.
They do.
You know when a kid is fabricating something
Mm-hmm.
because they get nervous. So obvious they'll say some of the most out there things like, well, I saw a ghost throw green slime on the wall. Like
Mm-hmm.
something just out there. You can tell by their facial expressions, and kid is willing to draw something for you,
Mm-hmm.
and they're calm, and they're like, no, this is how this happened. You need to believe a kid. Kids say what is on their mind, and they have no filter usually.
Right,
They
and
are the truth
yeah,
tellers. They are the whistleblowers. And even in TV shows and movies, Hollywood kills off the children for knowing things that they weren't supposed to know.
that's true.
So how many kids have been killed for these types of things too? Luckily, my parents had raised me to know when to speak and when not to speak, even with my non-filtered mouth. My family, especially my parents, have really drilled it into my siblings and I about all of these conspiracies and what's to come in the future. Not where the Titanic and Olympic are concerned, but the financial part, the elites and stuff. Oh, absolutely. Okay, so some are saying there's controversy here, okay?
Mm.
And one of those things are, did it actually hit an iceberg, or did a stern or boiler catch fire? You said there were witnesses who saw the ship
There were.
hit an iceberg. That makes sense.
I really do believe the iceberg theory it may even be incidental. They definitely were people down on the poop deck that saw it, and then the guys in the crow's nest saw it at the very last minute because, as you say, the binoculars have been missing since I think Southampton, and for some reason they were not in the crow's nest. And it was a flat calm that night, so there was no water breaking on the edge of the icebergs to be able to see them. And I think it was moonless too. It was a very, very dark night.
Weren't they close to those ice walls?
If you want to go with that theory, no, that's on the other end of the planet. That would be south. They were in the North Atlantic.
The reason I was asking is that would make sense as to why there were icebergs.
It would be. Well, there used to be a lot more icebergs than there are now because of global warming. They would break off of like the North Pole area and come down what's called the Labrador Current. And Captain Smith actually steered further south because there were ice warnings earlier that day, and he, not realizing that the Labrador Current he steered directly into the path of them because the current had pulled them further south. If he had continued on the course, he would definitely wouldn't have hit the same iceberg, but he may not have hit anything at all. And there's a picture taken from the Californian of an iceberg that has a clear paint smut. We think this is the one it hit.
And I remember seeing that floating around for a while. The shape of the iceberg is obviously different than what they were describing.
Well, they're known to turn. Like once they get too heavy or melt enough on the top, they'll flip. And the one that they hit was known as a bluebird. It was like a color of ice. I do think that they hit an iceberg, but the coal fire, if that was burning in one of the coal storage rooms, if the steel hadn't already been like red hot from it, it may not have done the damage that it did because it was so brittle from the heat and then the cold water.
But if we're dealing with the Olympic here, that was already badly damaged up there before and wasn't completely patched up correctly, because
that
they were
also
already settling for a loss, that it was already set up to fail that way, so I think both theories could be true.
It could be incidental that they hit the iceberg and it's going to happen anyway. You're right. I learned an interesting thing when going back to the coal, because of the coal fire. They had moved so much of the coal from the the starboard side over to the port side, that it was actually listing a little bit. When in the pictures you can see that the boat's kind of shifted off to, it's leaning to the left a little bit. And that right there kept the fact that it was listing a little bit when it was hit.
Right.
You know, because the weight was heavier over there. It was one of the reasons it didn't capsize. And I didn't realize that until, you know, all my years of researching that. I didn't realize that until this morning. On the side, you'll need to find a side version of a picture of the Titanic where it shows the portholes. You can't really see them. You can on here. Yes, there are those, and they look irregularly spaced, but you can't really count them on that picture. And the count is definitely there are 2 more on the bottom of the ocean than there ought to be based. And you can compare that to the images of the ones underneath, and you can tell, like when you focus at the portholes. On the portholes, they don't line up. They stopped a couple of times, and there were some people who disembarked, and one of them took pictures, and his name was Father Brown. And the pictures he took of the ship sailing away really appear to be the Olympic.
Here's the sinking of the ship.
Oh,
This is an outstanding underwater image.
it is. It is.
I mean, just especially for being so old. This is just I'm surprised any part of the Titanic still exists or whatever boat is down there.
It really was an amazing thing when it was found, and it was found in such good shape.
It blows my mind that it took so long to
They
find.
knew where it went down, you know.
Exactly.
They picked people up. They had the coordinates, but it still took, you know.
And the claim was is it kept moving and kept moving and kept moving. Excuse me, this is far too heavy.
Yeah.
A little too deep for that to move.
It makes you wonder if they hid where it was. Really, they had to have the coordinates wrong for nobody to be able to find it until 1985.
That would make sense because they want to bury the truth.
Exactly.
They don't want us to know. So is there anything else that you would want the viewers to know about the Titanic or the Olympic and the insurance fraud, the conspiracy behind it that we haven't already tried to cover?
I think you did a very good job of covering all the topics that I really can think of right off the bat. Everything that I had thought to talk about, you brought up.
I appreciate it. And I really wish Paul could have, joined us. But, Stone, this has been such a great conversation. And I really
enjoyed it.
appreciate you coming up here and answering my questions and, covering the topics that were given to me relating to the Titanic and the conspiracies behind it.
I think always question everything. And even if you think you know, maybe you don't know. Everything's always worth a second look.
And a good theory is always worth looking into.
Absolutely.
Don't take someone's word for it.
Yeah.
If it's being questioned, go find the answer.
Mm-hmm. Look for yourself, then you know.